This video shows you how to configure a patron as an Outreach patron in Leap. The Leap Outreach functionality is not tied to the patron code. A patron with any patron code can be marked as an Outreach patron in the database. Conversely, if your library uses an Outreach patron code, it does not automatically mean the patron has been added to the Polaris Outreach function. By designating a patron as an Outreach patron in the Polaris functionality, staff will be able to track service dates, track preferences, and track the user's delivery details. This video will be longer than our usual videos. Feel free to zoom ahead to the section you are interested in watching. Timestamps for each section are listed in this slide. Let's first look at how to set up a patron's Outreach profile. Start by opening a patron's record. Navigate to the Reader Services tab. Depending on your screen size, this tab may appear under the More drop-down menu. Again, only staff who are part of the Outreach permission group will be able to access and modify this tab. All of the functions in Outreach can be used on an as-needed basis. This means you do not need to set up all of the options listed here, just the ones that are relevant to your library. To activate a patron as an Outreach patron, select the Outreach Enabled checkbox and click Save. We're next going to look at how to use Outreach to track service dates. You'll see after clicking the Outreach Enabled checkbox, the Outreach options are now available to modify. One of those options is Next Service Date. This date shows staff when the patron is next due for new library materials. Click the date and a calendar will open. Staff can manually set a next service date. Or, staff can use the delivery schedule option at the bottom of the screen to set a regular interval for service. I'm going to select monthly as my option for this patron and click Save to save the changes. Now, when I check an item out to the patron, I will be prompted if I want to update the last service date to track library service to this patron. Let's see what it looks like. Here is my alert. I can click Yes to update the last service date, which in turn will update the next service date. Let's go back to the Reader Services tab. Now that I've prompted Leap to update the last service date, today's date displays as the last service date, and the next service date has been updated based on our schedule. Staff can also manually adjust the last service date by clicking the Update Last Service Date button, selecting a date from the calendar, and clicking Update. You can additionally pause a patron's Outreach status. Let's say they spend winters down in Florida. You can pause the patron by setting the status to Inactive. This will prevent the patron from appearing on your library's upcoming service list when they're not receiving Outreach materials. Now let's look at how to establish preferences for the user to help in material selection. In the Reader Services tab, click on the Preferences menu. We'll briefly look at each area here. The General area is where I can indicate if the patron has disabilities to note or if the patron has equipment needs. These lists are developed by the library. If your library does not have need for them, this area may be blank. These options are informational only and will not impact material selection if you use the Polaris auto-generated selection list. The next three areas in the Preferences menu are tied to Reader's Advisory and are used to create auto-generated pull lists for the patron. Clicking on any of these three options will open a dialog box where you can indicate subjects, authors, or genres the patron does or does not like. My sample patron, for example, likes reading about Chicago, art, and private investigators. They've indicated that they do not like reading books with time travel. Now, when Polaris auto-generates a selection list for this patron, it will match my subject preference terms to the subject terms in catalog records to identify titles the patron may be interested in. You can repeat the process for both author and genre terms. If you're unsure about the best way to enter a term, check with your library's cataloging staff to see how it is used in records. Finally, in the other preferences, I can include or exclude preferences such as material type, language, target audience, and publication date. For example, if the patron only wants to see newer materials, I can select a range of dates to include only items published in the last couple years. And if they don't have a Blu-ray player, I use preferences to exclude Blu-ray material types. Click Save to save any changes. We will see how these preferences come into play during the Using the Outreach Services selection list video. Finally, there are a couple standalone settings you can use to help with selection. If the patron only wants items they have not read, watched, or listened to previously, make sure the Allow Previous Items to be Resent checkbox is unchecked. This will exclude any previously used titles from the auto-generated selection list. Or, if the patron doesn't mind rereading items, select the checkbox and specify how long in between before they have the option to repeat titles. Polaris will use the reading history to determine if the title has been received before. If at one point the patron decides they only want to receive items they've placed on hold, select the checkbox for Patron Selection Only. This will prompt staff to pull only titles the patron has requested themselves. The last function we'll look at is how to use Outreach to track a patron's delivery details. In the Reader Services tab, scroll down to the Delivery Options schedule. There are a handful of selections you can make to organize delivery for this patron. Delivery mode, route, and stop will draw from values input when your library was setting up the Outreach module. Using mode, you can designate how the patron will receive their library materials. Next, you can assign the patron to a route. Depending on your library setup, routes may be tied to a geographic region, like north, south, east, west, or may be tied to a certain day of the week, like it is here. The last field, stops, is optional. If your library lists specific stops on the route, you can use this field to indicate which stop the patron belongs to. Again, the schedule field can be used to set a regular interval for service. Finally, you can also designate a pickup person for the Outreach patron and add any relevant notes. Remember to save any changes. If you have any questions about configuring Outreach patrons, email help@ccslib.org.